Your hands together for Joon, researcher in VR for MMU.
Hello. My name is J multiple O's N Joon, and I'm actually from MMU, so I'm one of the future graduates that is under virtual reality. So there's a lot of things that people would have to know about me, which is I like digital things. I'm not traditional to anything, and I'm very keen on picking up new fields. So I like visual effects, and I learned cinematography. I also took up photography, and I also did print and publishing before, and now I'm totally into virtual environment design. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I want to talk a little bit about designing stuff for VR, and also I'm going to show you a little bit of the IP that I worked on in MMU. Okay, let's switch to my IP. Oh, we can! It works! Okay, not sure. So I make AAA quality of graphics when I did for my project. So this was it in a frame composition, and it didn't migrate into. Oh, okay. Okay. If I were to put it here, I think. In my mind. So I did audio programming, and I also did visual effects along with a virtual simulation. So this is what my IP looks like in a frame composition, and then we migrated it into Oculus Rift. So now this is what I'm gonna try to explain step by step, or the different considerations that come in. So this is my IP. Welcome to live for Oculus Rift. Okay. Yeah, no, back to the very boring stuff. Can I use this? Yes. Okay. Yeah, that was live, and today we're gonna start off with cinematography a little bit. And I took one of the films that was recently a big transition into the VR market, which was Wild. If you know Reese Witherspoon, and if you watch some of the Sundance entries, this is one of the movies that made it into a 3-minute VR experience. So the movie has a 3-minute version, which is 360 experience that you could try on the Samsung Gear VR. Do we have that here? Do we have the Gear VR? No Gear VR today. Yes, but the Gear VR is the version of a head-mounted display that you slot in a phone, which is the Note 4. Yeah. So that is one of the experience that they featured at Sundance. So now that we know that some of these different fields are migrating into VR, we're gonna be quite flooded with a lot of new content in the future. So so there are two different things about how VR is represented. There is intimacy and familiarity. So what is intimate to you? Is it a person being right next to you, close in proximity? Is it a person that you could relate to emphatically, emotionally? This is what VR could do. So this is the quote that was about Wild, the experience. She's skinny, she's scruffy, and she's almost eerily present. For us, it was all about the intimacy. So in that frame that you see over there is Reese on the left side, and then over on the right side of the frame, which is opposite her in 360. So imagine that she's here and here, and then you're in the middle. So you can turn your whole body, and then you can see two different characters behaving one another. So this is in this is in a 360 experience, so you could actually see a cinematic 24 FPS film being run in a virtual environment. So what I said just now is that intimacy comes with space perception. You think that someone is much, much, much more personal to you if they are just about the same level as you. So if I were to sit down here and then if I were to interact with you one-on-one, that would be called an intimate presentation, right? So what do we have when we take a look into cinema? We have the typical cinema viewing experience, which is what you're used to at GSC or TGV. And then we have something that is not relatively new, but still not well marketed, which is IMAX experience. The IMAX screen is shot in 75mm format, 70mm format, and it is actually enveloping the entire viewing experience. So if you are used to looking at a TV experience, which is you can see the frame right in front of you, when you sit in an IMAX screen, you will have views within your peripheral vision, which is to the left side, to the right side, above you and below you. That's if you're seated at the right position. So that was what the change that happened previously when, you know, the first time the black and white film, the motion black and white film, The Arrival of a Train, that scared everybody because they didn't see that a train coming in motion was going right through them. They think that, you know, this is a real train. Yeah, this is the same way that we are slowly embracing bigger viewing perceptions, and then envelope perceptions, and then finally 360 full immersion. Do you think that you would be familiar with a 360 experience? That is the one question that we would like to look into today. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a favorite film of mine, which is Drive. Has anybody watched Drive? Okay, good. So you might be able to get... does anybody know Tony Zhao from Every Frame Painting on YouTube? Which he delves into different films, and then the way that they are shot, the way that they are composed, every single details about them. So if you haven't checked out Every Frame Painting, please do.
Tony Zhao.
Okay, can we play the pins? Yeah. So this is 1 minute clip for the entire whole 3 minutes.
How the director takes a conventional scene and does unconventional things. As the driver enters, he's up in the top left. So naturally, we assume the next shot will have the other person in the top right. But instead, once the shots move closer, we get two characters short-sighted like this, with tons of space behind them. Even though they want to talk, there are other obligations. Once the two men confront each other, notice that they occupy the same quadrant, with their eyes in the same spot, because they're fighting for the same position. Meanwhile, Irene is framed top right or dead center, the object of their affections. Even though she's out of focus, watch her performance.
That's very nice. That's nice of you. Thank you.
The scene finally pays off in this image, balanced between top left and bottom right, letting us visually compare the two men and see the long shadow one casts towards the other. Even though we've...
Yeah, so that is 1 minute out of the whole 3 or 4 minute breakdown of Drive. So this is called the quadrant system, which is a shot that is divided into 4 sections. So how do we take a shot that is usually framed in a rectangular form? How do we take that into VR where there's no bounds? It's very difficult when it comes to cinematographers or any filmmaker when they want to do editing, because we're used to shots being transitioned into one another. One shot you see the character about to run from a corner, and then the other shot you see that she's already ducked down and then peeking towards the corner. So that is done by editing. But how do you do a pacing when it comes to VR? If you are in a first-person experience and then that happens, you would totally feel a very loose light emotions, like, whoa, I didn't know that I was gonna be here. I was there and then now I'm here. So that's one of the considerations that comes into count, because familiarity, you need to be sure that you know where you are being placed in a VR experience. That is one of the most biggest importance. So transitions and compositions and editing. So how do we move from that 4-quadrant system into VR? So you see this? This is a spherical. We took one of these classes in MMU. So we did perspective spatial drawing, and this is the spherical perspective where you could see the grid and the quadrant system being overlaid on top of one another. But this is a traditional rule when you come to compositing one frame scene. Can we bring that into a spherical world? So there's no more frame, so how do you make the user decide whether or not one frame is the one that you want to emphasize on? So let's look at while again, and how did that overlay work into while? So did you see that the quadrant system still actually works? Is that they managed to overlay or place Reese opposite the, I think, Phantom of a Mother. Yeah, and then you could be able to position yourself in one camera view, and then the opposite camera view, and then you learn two different stories about two different characters. So the idea of composing a frame still exists. It's just that in VR it's a whole new playground, and we don't really know what is the best way to compose a subject. Okay. It also means that there's way too many data that comes in, because you have 360 view. And then if you want to have an action scene with a helicopter flying, and then you're in a war zone, World War II reenactment, and then you're busy looking at the other person who's holding a gun, and he's screaming at you, we need to go forward, and then there's like a flying helicopter and whatever it is. So that is a lot of data, and that comes into a lot of consideration when you are trying to compose for VR. So it becomes less of a objective matter. It became a more subjective matter for the filmmaker or the director. So the question is, can we always design one true view for an experience? So the one way that we could tackle that is to look into video games. So if you guys play PlayStation 4, this is one of the latest games that came out recently, which is Order 1886. And this game does a on-rails experience in third person. So you're always confined to a third person view, and then it's widely cinematic. It's a very long ratio that they cropped off. So that perspective is very, very wide, and then you need to be able to learn how to focus between one character or one thing that is happening in the scene. So video games, they do a lot of that, because there's no static framing or composition in video games. The user can always change the view if he wants to, so that will always hello. It will always come into consideration whether or not a frame would be consistent with what the gameplay is going to do. So if you see this is a dark, limited corner, right? What if it's a very open field? So how do you compose that? That is always going to be the question for video games design. So in design considerations, well, I have 7 minutes left. There are multiple perspectives. If you played at least one of an Oculus Rift experience, most of them are first-person views, because they provide the true, how do I say this? The true presence of being there. You are becoming someone else, or you are becoming something else. So being in first person, being in the eye of whatever it is that you are assuming a form of, is one of the biggest and most mainstream ways that VR is being presented. There's also third person view. So if you see on the right corner, that's Vanguard 5, and you see, I think Daniel showed the same YouTuber playing another game just now, and he is tilting his head up and down, and then it's actually moving the third person character throughout that composed frame. And there's also the on-rails perspective. We have a demo just now, which was literally on rails. It was a roller coaster experience. So that allows for more control. So you don't really have the user forcing his or herself to try to explore everything. So yeah, there are 3 different mainstream perspectives right now. But what about other different perspectives that we could do in VR? Can we do a top-down perspective view? Can we do a God mode where we look from the top and then we control real-time strategy game? Would that help when you do in VR rather than being in a composed frame? So there's a lot of different ways to handle perspectives. There's also motion. For me, I get nauseous very easily when I put on the HMD, any HMD. So I had to do my project in Oculus, and imagine how much of trouble I have to go through doing that. So you always have to ask yourself, what is the most comfortable experience for you? Is your experience stationary or is it mobile? Do you have to move, or do you just sit down and enjoy the whole ride without having to wonder whether or not I should move my body left or right? So there's a lot of motion going on when it comes to VR space, because it's 360 for once. You have that degree freedom of movement that you can turn. So that's already one motion. What about interaction motion? How do you move your character? For why is it stopping? Do.
I'm here.
Yeah. Well. What if you need to move your character in 3D space? So can you just pick a choice to design something that is laid back, or would you like to be able to make the user experience a walkthrough? So I'll show you how an Oculus Rift looks like. This is what it is right now, which is wired, multiple wires. Multiple wires. So we have the charger, the power input. We have two inputs that go in. we have two inputs that go into the USB port. So bye those two USB. If you're having a laptop, then maybe reconsider getting a desktop. So one is actually for the positional tracker. The latest HMD devices, they come with a camera that tracks your positional space. So this camera actually defines where you are in X, Y, and Z without with the addition of being able to turn your body 360 degrees. So if I were to duck, the camera would know that I'm actually lowering my height. So those two USB ports, one is actually going into the camera, one is actually going into the power slot of the HMD, and then there's also different inputs that you have. This is the Razer Hydra. So imagine having this added with being blind when you're wearing a HMD. Would that be making it so much more difficult for you to play a video game? Would it be making your design or interactivity difficult? So that is one of the problems that we are facing in VR, which is what input is the best. So what I did for my project was that I have to lift it up again. I put on a leap motion. Does anybody know what leap motion is? Okay, good. The leap motion is attached right in front of the HMD, and then it actually defines your space hand in 3D space, and then you could actually do this and then move the character forward. So if I were to swipe left, my body will be floating or warping to the left side. Yes. Difficult stuff, really. I don't know why people want to be so enthusiastic with VR. Please. No. It will get better. It gets better in the future. So we have the freehand. We have the wired experience. We have so many other different experiences. You could combine it with a Kinect. You could combine it with a gamepad controller or the basic motion controllers like the 6-sense STEM system or something. Yes. So try imagine that if you're holding all of this and then you're having this, how can you have a motorcycle ride like that? Like you'll be forgetting what you're already holding, and then you're trying to think that you're moving really fast. So it's all of these things are coming and being processed into your brain. So it's very, very difficult. So then there comes the objective familiarity. So in VR, everything has to be correct in sense of scale and proportion. So you have to be making sure that whatever you are creating, the experience is relevant to the user or the person who's making it, the person who's playing it. So if you're making a game about being a child, then the objects need to be much, much bigger than the first person controller or the first person character. You always have to be looking up. But if your story says that I'm a child, but then you are actually taller than everything else in the room, that's not relevant, right? So everything has to follow scale and proportion. This is one of the big things that comes into designing environment or architecture, and especially in VR, which is proportion. There's also the part of familiarity in being human. So you have avatars or you have empathic narration. You don't want a user to go into an experience and then he or she feels so foreign to it. He or she is left alone. They don't really know what they're going to do inside there. No one's there to guide them. So at least you provide guidance in the form of familiar faces. There's this chart on the right. Is it a chart? Oh, it's a graph on the right. That is familiarity versus human likeness. If you can see Pixar, Disney's Jack, which is the baby that is simplified, and then there's also a real baby. So that is more familiar, and then that is more alike to human. But then that's also eerie creepy. May I continue? Do you want me to continue in sense of design stuff? Yeah. Okay. There's also a sense of whether things are weirder or creepy in VR. So you have to consider whatever these guides or these NPCs or the avatars, or if you're shooting a film, you have to consider that you won't try to creep out the audience too much. You always have to try to consider that they think that this is real. So that's the number one consideration. So there's this thing called the empathic model, where you go into an environment and then you behave because you think that you are someone else. You are supposed to behave that way. So if I were to jump into a wheelchair experience, I would be experiencing different challenges. Like, I wouldn't be able to make my character climb from down here up here just this way. I would be needing a ramp somewhere over that corner, and then my character or my player would be already thinking, hey, I need to go all the way to that corner just to climb up here. So that's the one thing that you could embed into an emphatic model. I think if you guys played Alien Isolation, it's also in Oculus Rift, which is one of the scariest games on Oculus Rift, which brings Ridley Scott's biggest horror franchise into virtual reality. Yeah, you could actually get yourself involved with being hunted. So when you peek down, I mean when you duck down, when you peek, you feel the emotion of being hunted. So that's the one way where VR acts within its environment using the empathic model. VR friendly UI. So if you guys play video games, you should know that, let's just say if you have smartphones or mobiles, then you already have interaction with user interfaces. So what about interfaces that are in 3D form? So in 3D space, you will actually have to consider that if you block your eye, then not everybody is Tony Stark, right? You can't really have all these gizmos happening in front of your eyes, and then you try to put it on a small child, he or she will freak out, right? So the best way to put VR UI design is always to think the freedom of movement, where that UI doesn't really block your movement left and right. That UI could also be in physical space. Rather than it being right in front of your eye, it could actually be on the floor. You could read instructions on the floor. You could open up a book, and then it is a journal that you could bring around. Those are the kind of things that you should consider when it comes to building UI. So for my project, we had this palm UI. So when I lift my palm in front of my face, it will actually bring up 5 fingers with 5 different interactions that I could do. So yeah, that's one of the ways that you could embed UI, which is your own body and self. And over on the right is Elite Dangerous, which is, if you try to think it in a 360 experience, it is available for Oculus Rift. They put all the user interfaces into cockpit view. So when you turn around and then you check out your car or whatever vehicle, or if you're moving in a mechanical suit, then the UI would be over on the side, planted or whatnot. This is the one thing that I think will be the most marketable thing in VR, which is content migration, because we have too many movies being remastered into 3D. Is that correct? Are you sick of it? Okay, thank you. This is gonna happen in VR, so don't worry. You're gonna see Lion King in VR also. I'm not gonna predict too much of the future, but you know, it's possible. But I don't think a lot of people will complain that much, but it will be something that worth complaining about if the quality sucks. What happens is that when you remaster old content, that content is not built for a 360 experience, and then that happens with distortion and warping. So whatever that frame view that you see there, they're going to stretch it, and then that's going to ruin the experience. So not really everything is going to work in VR. The best way to tackle VR is just to make new content all the time. But this is how it works. So the lens on if you check out the Oculus Rift later, you can see that you can change between two lenses for far-sighted or near-sighted, but the view display is actually flat by itself. What the lens does is just going to magnify the view, but what the actual thing that is happening behind the screen is that the content is being processed into a warp view, so it's becoming a semicircle that would fit into a 360 view that would distort your own eye retina into thinking that it's all warping around you. So yeah, what happens with VR also is that sharpness, in the sense of our eye and peripheral vision, I can see you, the sharpest, but I think my friend is over there, somewhere over there. So I'm not really able to focus. So that's a lot of things that you should consider when you are migrating content into VR. There's also the part where I think Daniel mentioned just now, is that frame rates are problematic. You need to be considering that when you are rendering for, I think in cinematic stuff, I don't think this comes into matter, because when you are shooting something, it will always stay in 24 frames per second or 60 frames per second. But if you are rendering stuff, graphical capability comes into an importance, because the eye can accept 60 hertz or 60 frames per second, or 75, which is the optimum value. Where they did the Interstellar experience, they did it using a graphic card that was called the NVIDIA GTX Titan with I think 6 GB of memory. So that costs about 3,000 just for the card. So if you're trying to render things in VR, you should always consider designing the environment as simple as possible. So think about everything that you think is irrelevant in that experience, chuck it. Don't really put it. So this is one way that they did it in Unreal, which is 220 frames, which is very fast for any computer and very smooth. But then when you move it into Oculus Rift DK2, it drops straight to 37. It's almost to the point of Assassin's Creed Unity, which is very bad. Yes, so you should always consider what you are designing. So asset production, make sure that it's low poly. This is in the terms of game design. And also make sure that if it doesn't come into the view, don't put it. And then this is the last one, where I think it's a warning for everyone who's trying to use any HMD. You're always going to get motion sickness. The optimum, based on the research, the optimum experience always lasts between 15 to 20 minutes. So no experience should be more than that. Even 3 minutes, some people cannot take it. So it depends on each person and each gender, metabolism, different ways of experiencing it. But make sure that everything is simple. Make sure that there's ease in movement. Don't do this. This is gonna make everyone cringe. So aim for a very short experience. Like my one is only 15 minutes. We work with Bait, the DJ, and we told them, can you cut down your set? Usually when you go clubbing, it's like 2-3 hours, right? Can you hype up the crowd within 15 minutes? And they're like, oh, okay, we could try. Yeah, so it's short, but then you have to design something that is repeatable or recyclable, like that WoW experience. It's the same thing, or the roller coaster experience is gonna go in a circuit, but it's always gonna be something new for someone else. Yeah, and also to avoid eye strains, low filters. Try to be natural. Try to think, if you're looking into this space right now, would you want it converted into an Instagram filter? No, right? So yeah, you will be uncomfortable with those kind of stuff. Don't overdo it. A project. That's how I got into VR Malaysia. I was really shy, and then I told Daniel, I kind of need help with optimizing my content. Then he let me post, and then he actually pinned the post, and then a lot of responses that came in were trying to help me out. And I think it's a fairly new ground for almost all of us developers, and we're trying our best to come up with new ways to experience VR. But always, when you are designing or shooting for VR, think that, or assume that your users will always be afraid. They will always be the kind of people who will not be able to accept this immediately. So that is the best way. Low expectations. Then, yeah, simplistic yet explorative. I think I should be done now. Thank you.
Give it up for Joon.